Hi, I'm Patrick Palm, CEO and founder of Favro, and this is the Learn from Leaders podcast. The background to these interviews is that Favro clients are some of the most innovative and agile businesses out there. And it's used for collaborative planning by marketing teams, by product teams, HR, management teams. And what this means is that we get to know some truly inspiring people. So what we do in this podcast is that I invite them here for a conversation about something where they are true leaders, so we can all learn from it. Let's go.
But maybe we can start by your origin story. I mean, you've done an amazing journey in this industry, and I think we all would love to just hear your journey that brought you to this point of investing in cool game companies.
Yeah, so thank you guys first for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. You've been talking about ideas a lot, so I brought two IDs. So this is my passport, and here is my driver's license. So I have two IDs for you too. So my origin story, I guess, starts when I joined CCP. Into the game industry. I was working for a startup in Iceland that was like an internet startup. It was a kind of like a Sputnik company that attracted a lot of talent in Iceland. And all of the original staff, or most of the original staff at CCP, met at this company. It's called Ottarsson. And I was pretty young in my career, and I thought I was very lucky to have the opportunity to work there. Video games were simply not created in Iceland, and the video game industry was very, very far away. And I think it was a little bit weird in a sense to be tackling a large, complex MMO project which CCP set out to do without having any experience in the field and nobody to talk to. There was one guy we knew from Ottarsson who had made it to the West Coast in America, who was working in games, and we would sometimes call him late at night, but that was it. And but Eve came out in 2003, and I think because of this unique perspective of not having done this before, it became this unique product, and it's still around today, 17 years later. I was lucky enough to, grow with the company. I started out as an engineer. I wasn't a very good engineer, and so as the company grew, I scaled out of that and turned to management, project and program management first, and then led CCP's transition to cross-functional teams and more agile as that was becoming a thing in the game industry. And then the company grew even further internationally. We had offices in the UK, in China, and in the US. And I took kind of like a broad perspective around our production practices found myself traveling a bit between those offices. And CCP, it grew not only in offices, but also just in statue and the game at that point had earned many accolades, and we started to talk a bit about how we were doing things at CCP, and I did a handful of presentations on that at numerous GDCs and others, and that's how I initially met people from Riot Games. So in 2009, League of Legends came out, and I think just initially thereafter, I met folks from Riot at conferences, and we started to talk about production practices and share knowledge. And I did a visit to their offices pretty early on, and that was in their old offices, which are not nearly as fancy as their new offices. And we had kind of like a back and forth dialogue. At the time, there weren't many companies that were geared up to be delivering online gaming experiences directly to their customers, and Riot was hyper focused around its players, and so we were able to share a lot of insights in that sense. And then in 2012, I ended up joining Riot Games and started working on League of Legends as the development director. And League, of course, continued to grow and grow quite a bit. So that team, when I interviewed, the company was 400 or 200 people, and when I joined, like a few months later, it was 400 people. And I think within the first two years, it had doubled again. And so so that was it was an exciting time, but also obviously a lot of challenges, and especially on the production side, as the game was growing, and we had some kind of like early stability issues and growing pains overall. And then I helped with the organizational scaling at Riot, and ultimately ended up managing development managers and development directors across all of the game properties. Many of them have seen the light of day by now, and if you haven't checked them out, you should check them out. They're all very, very fun to play. And then last year, I left Riot to pursue a passion of mine, which is startups and investing. So alongside my Riot journey, I had started to do a few angel investments, and that grew also over time. And I had become a I wouldn't say significant, but somewhat established portfolio, and I just wanted to do more of that. And that's what I've been doing for the last year.
I know you have some favorites among those games that's been coming out that you can announce, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been playing a lot of Valorant personally recently, and so I think that's a fantastic game. Yeah.
Did it? I mean, maybe this is a sensitive question, but did it come out the way that you thought it would come out, or was it your what you saw when you were on that project, was it something kind of different from what came out?
For that specifically, not really. I think there is I mean, yes, of course, it's not exactly the same, but the base thesis stood quite a bit there, and so
cool. So going a little bit deeper into your investment, what is it that you're looking for anyone who contacts you and looks for your money?
Right.
What is it that you will be looking into then, or alternatively, if you are proactively looking for companies, what is it that you're looking for?
Yeah. So investment for me is both angel investing and strategic advising at a personal level, but I also work with a VC fund that focuses on the video game industry as well. And so for me personally, I like to invest in companies where I can add a lot of value, because like I said, I really got hooked on the investing advising combo in this. And so that looks like multiplayer online experiences. Mostly you'll see in the things that I get involved with, but that's not like singular in that sense. I've also done a fair amount in mobile and mobile platforms. And then on the fund side, we really look at the industry in three buckets, which is game or content games, and then platforms, middleware, or things that cut across the spectrum, and then thirdly, ecosystem like esports or influencer type companies.
And more from a kind of team point of view, when you evaluate the group which is approaching you, what is it that you're looking for there?
Yeah, I think I look for experience and domain, both knowledge and passion. So I think it's okay that founders haven't done the exact game before, as long as they have a deep understanding for that genre and a deep passion for that. But in some cases, I come across people who've been making mobile games for the last decade, and then they want to go do a hardcore PC survival MMO or something like that. Sometimes that looks plausible, sometimes not. I think I also look at team comp quite a bit in terms of if you have 2 or 3 founders, how are they complementing each other? If it's 2 crazy, bright creatives, but with no engineering or production business attributes, that would be less likely than a well-rounded combination of 3 founders that really complement each other.
So you mentioned that you're also doing work with a venture fund, and I know that fund is on your LinkedIn, so I guess it's not a secret.
Right.
Can you tell more about that?
Yeah. So the fund's called Makers Fund, and it is a fund that was established in 2017 by 2 partners that really wanted to help out in the gaming industry with a specific gap that they saw when it comes to funding, in particularly at later stages. And so, since then, the landscape has evolved quite a bit, and there are now more funds than ever that are focusing on games, and more non-gaming funds also that are focusing on games. But that still holds, is that there's a lot of early stage or seed invested focused funds. I know that you're involved with one that is of that nature as well, and so the focus is to really be at that kind of like Series A stage mostly. Of course, we do some seed. We also do some later stage if it's appropriate.
Yeah, so you're right. I'm a limited partner in Play Ventures. So I'm obviously very enthusiastic about what we do, and there's been an amazing array of investments happening there. The team at the fund are doing a fantastic job. But what I also noticed, because you kind of get a nice overview perspective of what's going on in the industry, is that Makers Fund have got a fantastic reputation in short time. I knew it already earlier, but I definitely heard that when I was at Slush last year. This is obviously before Corona, so everyone can hang out. We can drink beer. You ask people, so what do you think about these guys? And everyone's like raving about them. So, what do you think that they got right? Because we're all 3 of us has been in the industry for a very long time, and I think it's safe to say that there's been it's been quite common to have a skepticism around venture capital companies in the game industry, and I think that has changed. I think it's more positive now, and hearing people raving about a fund like Makers Fund is definitely, if not a new phenomenon, it hasn't always been like that. So what do you think that they got so right in such a short time?
Yeah, I think generally the funding landscape in the like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when it comes to video games, there was maybe 1 or 2 funds that really understood game and game making, and so and a lot of and so I think when they came on, so there were 2 partners and a team, and now in their second fund there are 3 partners, and they are very in tune with the video game industry, very well plugged in, have a deep understanding on not how game development works, but also on the business side, on the platforms with the markets across the world. I think Game Maker's unique point also is that they're a truly global fund, and so many of the gaming-focused funds are more regional, and so they truly have a global presence and a global perspective. And I think for founders, they've proven that they really engage with founders. They really go deep with them. They go and roll up their sleeves and and help them not only through their networks, which are quite vast, but also just on a personal level.
So a pretty common, saying, from investors, but also from many entrepreneurs, is that, building a successful company is, 5% inspiration, 95% transpiration, or 5% ID and 95% execution.
Yeah,
there's many variants of this, and obviously, startups tend to not be the most heavy on processes and tools, but there's definitely that you also need to execute. I'm obviously very interested here in the perspective of how can Favor help for these startups. I mean, I noticed that even though many of the Favor clients in the game industry are relatively large studios with hundreds of users or even thousands of users, but there's also a lot of startups, entirely new companies, and many that I might not have heard about before, and I kind of researched them, and I'm very eager to find out what kind of cool stuff they're working on. So I just see from the data that obviously small companies that are startups care.
right.
But more from your point of view, since you're also a strategic advisor, what's your angle on how Favre can possibly help startups in the game industry?
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, early on, it's certainly not about the tooling, and more about just understanding what your core audience is and how you can cater to that, and finding the fun engagement in whatever core game or core loop you're trying to get at. But video game companies, they move fast, and so it's like, and especially on the mobile space, and especially now when we have all of the engines at their kind of elevated state now, and libraries and content available, and so it can be really fast. And so before you know it, you've grown your 2-person team to a 10-person team, or 15, 20, and startups very quickly on need to start to get organized. And one thing that I've noticed in kind of like the last year is there's a kind of like there's one particular deck that I've been sending out to a lot of startup funders, which is a kind of like, it was presented a year ago at a startup conference. It's around switching to outcome driven roadmaps, or focusing on outcomes over outputs, and which is certainly something that we spent a few years at Riot like hammering into, not only like the culture but also the way that we work. But this was very well captured in this deck, and I sent this out a lot. And so and I think when you then try to apply that to the way that you work, not only from a mindset perspective, but from a execution perspective, you can often get clanged up against your tools. And so I think Favre does a really good job of having kind of like the flexibility to structure your work and your organization in a way that lends it well to be able to match like non-linear complex backlogs potentially against like also non-linear but cascading outcomes. And so that's definitely a startup trend that I see often. Not everybody tries to solve it with Favre, but I've certainly seen it solved elegantly with Favre.
Well, that's great to hear. And for people that are not entirely familiar, what does kind of an outcome-driven approach mean in
right.
comparison to something else? Do you have some good examples from the game industry?
Yeah, I think you see that a lot. I mean, you can take anything that you do in terms of delivering a game or feature or a piece of content, and just translate it from like the thing that you're doing to that the thing that it produced. And the way that we like to talk about it is like, what is the behavioral change that happens in the world? Like, what do players do differently? And then the trick is to be able to capture and assert that somehow through some sort of metric. And I mean, you guys are a startup, and I'm sure you guys also try to take an outcome centric approach to what you guys are doing. Do you have an example from Favro that the audience maybe has familiar with?
I think outcome driven development, or really outcome driven goals, is very applicable for any kind of team. To have some concrete examples, I think for example in our case, we see that teams that are using Favro, they have a quite high engagement level. So
right.
You have managers that they plan thing, they set up collections to give an overview. Teams can look at that, but then if you look at the individuals, often they have a relatively large amount of autonomy for creating new kind of goals, objectives, tasks, and moving them along. But they also do a lot of the writing, writing that they might have been doing in Google Doc or in some kind of content management tool before. They're now doing in Favro. So it means that their engagement is quite high.
Right.
So engagement is key for us. So we try to set engagement goals for every feature that we develop, and then we measure. So we developed this feature, we launched it. What does the data say in terms of engagement? What's the feedback from the community? And what does kind of more, let's say, deep interviews with power users,
right.
say. So we try to use that kind of like triangle to evaluate, did we do a good job or not? Should we double down on this, or was this a mistake?
Yeah.
But I also think, sorry.
Go ahead. No, I was going to say there's one company that I'm involved with here in Iceland. They recently released a video game. It came out and was the #1 game in all of the App Store a few weeks ago. Very impressed with that team. And one of the things that they do is that they feel really liberated by this, by being able just to lead teams to a specific point, like metric. Like, this is your metric, and you are a 7-person team. And that's those are your marching orders. And it gives the leaders. This is like a 25-person studio, and it's led by 3 founders, and it gives them a lot of gives the team agency, but also gives them a lot of freedom around it.
I think you're touching upon something very important, because we're all about team autonomy and company alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that people often forget is that a high level of alignment enables autonomy.
Yeah.
If you have the trust, so if you as senior leadership have a trust in kind of your processes, your tools, your culture, that alignment is good, you can give a lot of autonomy to the teams. So alignment enables trust. And one of the best ways, the easiest ways to do that is by having very clear kind of metrics. And this ties into, there's a lot of talk, if we take this a little bit more general, around OKRs, objective, key
right.
results, but that kind of thinking is basically the same as we're talking about here. It's like different ways of talking about it, but it's
right.
in many ways the same way, same thing,
Yeah, but just this morning I was talking to another startup in Europe, and they're struggling a little bit with this like mindset shift, because they're a little bit ingrained in their tooling, like, because there isn't like an option for it, and you kind of like, you get bogged down or shoehorned into, well, we'll just make the epic the outcome, and then all of the user stories are the things, and then you get very kind of like bogged down in just like one level of thing or 2 levels of things, and not a really good way to tie things together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we can talk about this specific topic
for
a very long time.
Absolutely.
I want to go back to kind of a little bit your experience with very big studios again.
Yeah.
Because if you if we look at the market data today, we see that today the game industry is bigger than the movie and the music industries combined. So
Yeah.
so we're the new kind of big guys, which is cool because it hasn't always been like that.
But it's been like that for a while now, so yeah.
Well, maybe you might have the confidence for that, but trust me, when I speak to my friends in the film industry, they don't agree. But
Okay.
I like have to show them the numbers. Like, come on, it's like
Right.
data wins. But it's not equally distributed, because if we look now what happened here with Corona, what we have seen very clearly, there's big differences. You have some companies that were well prepared for Corona. They could very quickly switch to work from home, and they are continue to release even entirely new products, and they make a ton of money, and they're doing really well. And then we have some studios that are really struggling, and some very openly admitting to that they're having a tough time to do this. And if we're going very kind of last weeks or even days, we're seeing now that there's a lot of increase of lockdowns in the US again. So, and it's probably going to happen. We're probably going to have a couple of these before this is over. It's not going to really be over until we have a vaccine and everyone's been vaccinated. So, I mean, we're going to have to live with this for quite a while. And I don't think any company is really going to go back to the old normal anyways. So basically, the winners in this, I mean, so the game industry is a winner because people are at home, they play more games. So you have the opportunity for great business success. But to capture that opportunity, you need to have the way of working that functions in this climate, and you're going to need to have that for a while before you can go back to like normal office work, if that's what you want to do. And I know that, for example, Riot has been doing pretty well here. So my question to you is really, what, and I'm not really only talking about tools here. I'm really thinking a bit more wide. What in your opinion really makes that difference? The studio, which is very well prepared and set up, for succeeding in this kind of climate, in being a distributed studio, versus the one who's not.
Yeah. So I think Riot has been able to adapt quickly because they're able to adapt quickly. I don't think, but of course I can't really speak to these events because I wasn't there directly. But I would imagine that Riot actually is all of the game teams there are very co-located in California for the most part, and so I wouldn't say that it hasn't been, or I would imagine that it hasn't been without ease to move to remote and work from home. And but it's and it's phenomenal to see the things that they've been able to output. I mean, we were talking about Valorant earlier. That did not miss a beat, and came out, I think, right around when everybody expected it to come out, and I think before even the players expected it to come out, and to see that in the middle of Corona and everybody working from home for the last weeks and months on that was I was super impressed. So I do think that Riot has a culture of just of being adaptive and being able to do things like that, even though it's not. There are some things that have been set up in recent years, like moving more things to the cloud, having more SSO and things like that. That makes that easier now than it would have been 2 years before or 3 years before. But I also think it's a lot about the people there and kind of like the aptitude that Riot has hired for a decade, where you get individuals that are entrepreneurial and able to adapt well to rapidly changing circumstances.
Cool. Finally, I of course have to ask a more kind of direct, Favre question. I mean, one of the things that we see with our clients is that they don't come from nothing. They always have
Right.
other tools before, and then they migrate to Favre, and so they typically replace many tools, with Favre.
Yes.
And I remember, we spoke about that at some point, when you were at Riot, and I remember it was seemed like a pretty amazing amount of tools that you had replaced, but you have the right story. I mean, how what was your perspective on Favre replacing other tools?
Yeah, I mean, Firewall certainly did replace many tools. I think just to kind of to give the audience a bit of the story there was that Riot had grown very fast, and it's a collection of multiple departments and business units, both centrally in Los Angeles, but also across the world. So we had teams that had adopted probably every single project management tool that you can think of, and also some that you can't think of. And there was actually a just like a dire need from our central IT organization and compliance and legal to make sure that we that we had tools that were secure, compliant, that we were paying for them, or that if we weren't paying for them, that whatever content we put in there was encrypted or secured and whatnot. And so that was a big kind of lead up into the decision to go and consolidate a lot of this tool fragmentation that we had at the time. And so I think so it replaced not only project management tools, tracking tools, collaboration tools, like whiteboard collaboration tools and stuff like that were being used for things like this. Many of them were removed quite easily. It's very easy to just say please migrate over in X many months, and we will discontinue the use of XYZ product. And in some cases, it was more of I'm very ingrained in my process in this arcane tool that me and my team only use, and that was a bit more of a battle. And so but it was a large number, but it didn't replace everything. And a lot of the kind of core development had been done on Jira, and for many teams they still use Jira. A lot of the newer teams or R&D teams skipped that completely and started working directly in Favre. That is the case today. And then Favre was used across departments. It was used for the kind of larger portfolio management on all of our biggest properties, including League of Legends and our core platform and things like that. So it was a lot of tools.
I can imagine, and the thing you mentioned about Jira is not entirely uncommon. We had to put some extra effort into making sure that our Jira integration, both with Jira Server and with Jira Cloud, is pretty good, because many students been around for a while. They still have that legacy, and they have they're not going to migrate overnight, and they have to handle that.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. I certainly did. If you want to elevate yourself as a modern leader and help your teams become even more successful, then check out Favre Academy at favre.com. There you will find podcasts, webinars, articles, all free of charge. Check it out.